This is Dave Pellegrinelli from AFX Title Recovery. This video is about getting a title for your vehicle and recovering a title where one has been lost or not available. Now, if you're watching this video, you probably have a vehicle which does not have a title. There's probably some story behind how that happened. If the vehicle was purchased and the owner did not have a title to give you, that could be one scenario. We're going to go through a couple different scenarios of how a vehicle could end up in your hands without a title, and then what's the best way to get that title for you. First of all, our company is a title recovery specialist. We have 15 years of title research, investigations, and vehicle processing, so this is something we do every day. There's a couple different scenarios. First of all, you might have a car that was titled in your name. You had the title in your hand. You lost it at some point. This is probably what your title looked like when you had it. It was issued by the state. It has your name on it. It has your address. You need this to demonstrate ownership, to sell the car, to get insurance on it. That's something you need to prove that it's your vehicle and not just a hunk of metal from the street. So if you had a car and you had the title in your name and you just lost it, it got destroyed, and maybe got burned up, whatever the case is, that's what we call level one title recovery. That's pretty straightforward. That's something you can probably do yourself. If you go straight to the motor vehicle department, you can show your ID. They'll issue the same title you had before. It'll look exactly the same way your last title did. It'll have your name on it, the same address, and all the same information. If you can't do that, we're able to provide that service for you. It's more expensive than doing it yourself at DMV. DMV is probably going to cost you 50, 60 bucks. If you have us do it, it may cost you, depending upon the state and the fees and the time that goes into it, maybe 120 to 150 bucks, maybe a little bit more. The second scenario is where you bought a vehicle and the title was not in your name, and you had a title given to you from that seller, but you never put it in your name. That's a scenario that's a little more tricky, because you can't just go down to DMV and say, this is my car, give me another title, because they're going to think that the person you bought it from is still the owner, because they have no record of you ever purchasing that vehicle. If that's the case, that's called a level 2 title recovery. Those usually cost between $350 and $400, depending upon the scenario and the state and how the title was passed along to you and the access to that person. The most serious type of title issue is when you have received a vehicle that you never got a title, the person who you got it from didn't have a title, or that the title has been passed through 2 or 3 owners before you, and none of those owners have ever titled it in their name. In that case, in a level 3 title recovery, what we will do is first go back and do a very exhaustive background check of that vehicle, finding out who the prior owners were and all of the parties who may have an ownership interest in that vehicle. Could be lien holders, it may be mechanics, it may be the state itself, and it may even be banks who have liens on the car or a car loan. So once we determine all the prior owners who may have an ownership interest, we verify that all of their interests are ended, and then we go through a process of extinguishing their prior claims against that vehicle. Because before we get you a new title, we want to make sure that all of the old rights have been extinguished, because you don't want to get a car and have a title and then somebody pops up out of the woodwork later and says, that's my car, give me back my car. So we extinguish prior ownership rights, and then we create new ownership rights for you that's a clear title, that's legal, that can't be contested by other parties. This is done based on the history of the car, maybe the state that you're in, and maybe other states, maybe a state that the vehicle had been processed through before, maybe a combination of the two. These are all the title regulations for all the different states. As you can see, it's almost like a phone book, right? We go through this and realize that every state has their own regulations. We use the set of circumstances that best fit the scenario of your car for a level 3 title recovery. Usually it takes somewhere around 4 weeks. It could be 3.5 weeks. It could be 5 weeks, depending on the scenario. But we use the fastest process and the most efficient process. It starts with an investigation. We're a licensed private investigative agency, so we have access to records and research that an ordinary person doesn't. We first go through that process. We may be able to turn up a prior owner. They can sign over paperwork to you if that's the most appropriate process. That level 3 title recovery can get expensive. It could be between $400 and even $700 depending upon the scenario. So the best thing to do is see if you can find that title or get a hold of that prior owner and have them sign it over to you. If they can't, there are solutions, but it's very time intensive. Part of the reason is because we use a legal process. Now, we don't want to use any type of illegal method. Some people will claim that they can get you a title using a mechanics lien process. If you hear that phrase, mechanics lien process, be very wary. That process is reserved for a legitimate garage who had a vehicle that was brought there for work and the owner didn't pay for it. What's supposed to happen is that owner or that garage is supposed to put that car in storage, charge storage fees, put an ad in the paper to say that the car is being auctioned off, and then legally auction off that car to the general public for the highest bid, and then use that money to pay their mechanics lien or their storage fees. They're not supposed to just take the car. There are some garages or entities that can use that process to get people titles, but there's always that risk that somebody could come forward later and say, hey, that's my car, I left it at this garage, or that's my car and I didn't mean to sell it to you, right? So the other really serious consequence is if the state that this process occurs in does an audit of mechanics liens and looks to see that that car was actually there. Are there mechanics records showing that car was actually worked on? Was it physically located at that garage? Because the mechanic who performs this mechanics lien titling has to certify under oath in an affidavit that they actually had that car in their garage and it was being worked on. And if that's not the case, that's a fraudulent affidavit, and that could create legal problems for both the mechanic and for the new owner of the vehicle, and maybe even invalidate that title. So beware of mechanics lien process unless the car was actually there being worked on. What about abandoned cars? If you have an abandoned vehicle, there's a similar process. It's supposed to go for auction for wherever it was abandoned. Make sure that when you collect your paperwork to look at any type of title recovery, that you get some connection to the prior owner. Do you have a bill of sale? Do you have an eBay auction receipt? Do you have something from a Craigslist sale? Maybe it was purchased on Craigslist. Collect all that paperwork. Make sure you have the VIN number. You're going to need to know what the mileage is on the vehicle and also the circumstances how you arrived at owning the vehicle. So that can be documented. What about abandoned vehicles? Sometimes people ask about salvage vehicles. If a car is a salvage car, we can get a title for it. It's still going to be a salvage car. The title recovery process is not going to erase any salvage stamp on the title or rebuilt stamp, so that's going to stay there. This is not a process to be used for any illegal purposes like getting rid of salvage or getting rid of liens. The other part of it is there's maybe sales tax due. All of our fees include all the DMV processing costs, all the fees to the state, any of the other fees that go along with getting you the title. But if there's sales tax due on that vehicle, that's something separate, and this is not a method to avoid sales tax, so keep that in mind. We'll be glad to help with getting your vehicle title. If you have questions about your scenario, call us up. You can explain to us how you got the car and what the circumstances are, and we can explain which is the best, fastest, most efficient way to get your title for the least amount of money. Because without that title, the car is really just a hunk of metal. And there is an expense involved, but if the car needed a $400 set of tires to get back on the road, obviously you do that. This may be another expense involved to get that car roadworthy, to be able to be registered, to be able to be insured, to be able to be titled. Don't be afraid to call us up with your story. Tell us how you got the car, and we can figure out the best way to get you the title. And if you have questions about maybe even doing it yourself, we may be able to help you with that as well.